law enforcement authorities, and civil society organizations to gather input and expertise on addressing identified gaps in the existing system of managing unclaimed bodies. And number 4, recommend legislative proposals or policy recommendations, if any, aimed at establishing a national framework to address the identified gaps and challenges. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Ledama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise pursuant to Standing Order number 53-1 to seek a statement from the Standing Committee on Energy regarding electricity connectivity at various hospitals and public schools in Naro County. In the statement, the committee should state why a Murwe Dikir Level 4 sub-county hospital has not been installed with three-phase electricity to run the radiology department of the hospital. Number 2, state why over 27 schools located at Murwe Dikir sub-county of Ilkerin, Kapsasian, and Mogodo wards have not been connected to electricity. Number 3, provide a status report on the replacement of all faulty transformers in Naro County. Number 4, provide an update of the last mile electricity connectivity of all the schools and hospitals in Naro County. Number 5, state why level 3 hospitals in Naro County, including Sakutiek Hospital in Narok North, Loita Hospital in Narok South, have not been connected to electricity to be able to run equipment such as incubators and radiology department. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Now, Honorable Senators, I have a number of statements here that I've approved, though not listed in the order paper. So any Honorable Senator who wishes to make the request for the statement, I will read out. If you're ready, you can proceed. If you're not ready, you can actually do that tomorrow. I'm not seeing Senator Chiranke, Senator Enoch Wambua, Senator Maruma. If you're not ready, it's quite okay. You can read it tomorrow. Senator Beatrice Ogola. Senator Sifuna. Then Senator Kavindu. Yeah, thank you very much. That's it. So, Senator Maruma, proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity to request for this statement on the welfare of adult education teachers in Taita Taveta County. Mr. Speaker, I rise pursuant to Standing Order 53-1 to seek a statement from the Standing Committee on Education regarding the welfare of adult education teachers in Taita Taveta County. In the statement, the committee should, 1, state whether the Ministry of Education is aware that adult education teachers in Taita Taveta County have not received their salaries for a period of 10 months, giving timelines when the teachers are expected to receive their overdue salaries, and explain measures the ministry is implementing to curb future salary disbursement delays. 2, inform the Senate whether the Ministry of Education intends to recruit additional adult education teachers in Taita Taveta County to address the shortage caused by retirement and resignations. And 3, spell out plans, if any, to promote the teachers to the next grade and provide details of the adult education scheme of service. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Beatrice.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise pursuant to Standing Order 53-1 to seek a statement from the Standing Committee on Lands, Environment and Natural Resources regarding waste disposal by Sukari Industries in Dewa sub-county of Homa Bay County. In the statement, the committee should, 1, provide a comprehensive report regarding the location and methods utilized for the disposal of both liquid and solid waste generated by Sukari Industries in Dewa sub-county, Homa Bay County. 2, describe the treatment process employed for liquid waste, ensuring its alignment with the requisite environmental standards, and furnish the Senate with tangible evidence on the effectiveness of the treatment methodologies deployed by the company in the disposal of liquid waste. And lastly, Mr. Speaker, sir, undertake a site visit to Sukari Industries to evaluate their waste management strategies and actively engage with the local community to mitigate persistent apprehensions regarding potential environmental risks stemming from pollutants emitted by the industry. Senator Beatrice Ogola. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I rise pursuant to Standing Order 53-1 to seek a statement from the Standing Committee on National Security, Defense and Foreign Relations regarding the tragic incident that led to the death of Master Jolibin Iboshe, a 9-year-old child who drowned following flash floods in Mashimoni, Kibra constituency, Nairobi County, on the 5th of January 2024, and whose body is yet to be retrieved after being swept into the Nairobi Dam. In the statement, the committee should detail the actions taken by the disaster response authorities and national security personnel in the area to facilitate the recovery of Master Iboshe's body and hand it over to his family for a decent burial. And 2, outline targeted long-term strategies and actions that will be implemented to prevent similar tragedies in future. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Kavindu, you deferred your statement. Very well. Clerk, we move to the next order, please. Yes, Senator.
Mr. Speaker, yes, I deferred my statement, but I have a question, Mr. Speaker, on a statement I read in August last year from the Committee of Devolution concerning a map for Machakos before it became a county, and to date they have not gotten back to me from October last year. And another one to Minister of Committee of Roads concerning roads in Machakos in October last year, and they've not gotten back. One was in August, the other one was in October. So, Mr. Speaker, I would like these two committees to respond to me why they've not, and yet when you give the statements to them, you give them 60 days to respond back to the House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
So the chairpersons of the concerned committees, if I know under the standing orders you have that opportunity to give out your status reports, I want to believe that once we get there, the two committees, and not just the two committees, but all committee chairs should take note of this, that as you respond to all those many other issues, kindly make sure that you have given us a comprehensive answer as to why that statement has taken more than 60 calendar days as demanded of it in our standing order. So kindly be guided, more particularly the two chairs, Devolution and roads. Thank you. Next order, Clerk.
Order number 8, motion, report of the National Dialogue Committee.
Majority Leader.
I thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the Senate adopts the report of the National Dialogue Committee laid on the table of the Senate Wednesday, the 14th of February, 2024. Mr. Speaker, sir, this is a culmination of an exercise, at least outside of the House, this House, Mr. Speaker, that consumed a significant amount of time from those of us that participated in all the hearings, and the minutes are attached for members to confirm how many meetings we sat in at the Bomas of Kenya and other places within the Republic of Kenya. Mr. Speaker, we are all aware of the circumstances that led to the establishment of the National Dialogue Committee, that there were very challenging times for us as a republic, and therefore, in the prevailing wisdom of various stakeholders in this republic, from within and without of our nation, it was felt that it was important that at the very least, we should talk to each other. At the very least, the very bare minimum, that even though we may not agree eventually on even any single item that was put before us, but we were asked to at least converse and hear each other out. Growing up, Mr. Speaker, my mother told me there are two things for which you are almost being reckless if you choose to pick an argument with any person about. Number one is religion. Trying to sit across the table, say if you're Christian, with a Muslim or a Hindu, a Buddhist, and trying to prove to them why you're right and they are wrong, sometimes and most of the times is an exercise in futility. Second, after that, Mr. Speaker, is on the sticky topic of politics. How we view things, our perception, our beliefs, our ideologies, it's never easy to agree. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I went into this committee acutely aware that perhaps there might not be even a single reason or point of convergence that is likely to emerge out of the conversations you are having with our colleagues from the Azimio One Kenya coalition. But I report to the House gladly, Mr. Speaker, that to my surprise and that of many, that we almost actually virtually agreed on all the topics that were placed before us and have returned to the House a report which we want you to consider, read. The report, Mr. Speaker, for those members that are yet to interact with, is on our digital platforms. It's quite voluminous. I doubt if it will be intelligent of us to be the country that is leading the conversation on climate change and yet still printing thousands of pages of documents for its parliamentarians to use. Yet from a casual look at the House, Mr. Speaker, everybody here is digitally literate. Therefore, this report is in our gadgets, Mr. Speaker, and I believe members can take time to read and reflect, confirm and counter-check the points that I will raise from the conversations that we had. So, Mr. Speaker, I report to the House that we agreed on most of the issues, actually, some of which I had serious doubt that I could be convinced or persuaded otherwise by our colleagues from Azimio. But having taken time to listen to them and understand where they are coming from, we met somewhere in the middle, as is so typical of us as a Kenyan people. Mr. Speaker, many people say many things about NADCO and their preceding committee, and we have referred to their work in this document. Remember, Mr. Speaker, that earlier on we had moved a motion here setting up a dialogue committee made up of purely members of parliament. They didn't make much progress, but they covered serious ground and laid the foundation for the work that us, the succeeding committee, eventually completed. So I'd wish to celebrate them even from the onset, that the team that sat at Bomas, I believe, as well, that had distinguished members from this House and the lower house, Mr. Speaker, they laid the foundation for us as a committee that when we later on sat and retreated, Mr. Speaker, we referred to many of the documents that had already been presented. In fact, the working framework, Senator Mogeni will confirm, and the rules of engagement, we actually picked word for word what they had previously used with very minimal amendments, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, we have brought to you, colleague senators, the findings of this committee so that we get to hear your thoughts on the same. By passing this report, let me be clear on this so that members understand. There are various ways through which Parliament and Senate, to be specific, makes its decision. A resolution of the House is a decision as well, with the full force of law and enforcement, because this is a gathering of the Parliament of the Republic of Kenya. Yet, further down the report, Mr. Speaker, we have attached various statutory instruments which will have now to be considered individually. We have constitutional amendment bill, which you will have to read and consider, and I believe later on, Mr. Speaker, when we begin that process, both you and your counterpart from the lower house will have to guide both houses of parliament on how to carry out this constitutional amendment, especially given that this is a bipartisan process and therefore there is need to carry the views of everybody on board. There are various legal documents also, acts of parliament, not acts of parliament, proposed bills for consideration by this House, Mr. Speaker. Various policy positions that we felt we can address them by statute alone. And therefore, those bills are further attached in the report. You'll find bills on IBC and so on and so forth that I'll be speaking about later on. Then there are further policy propositions, Mr. Speaker, that we have made a decision on and have said that as a committee, this does not even require Parliament to do anything. You have sufficient laws to govern it, but perhaps those that are charged with the implementation of those policies have not been keen enough, Mr. Speaker, or haven't been diligent to ensure that those policies are adhered to and Kenyans are guided by those particular directions. And therefore, the same have equally been proposed, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, let me go straight, Mr. Speaker, to the 5 or 6 issues that we considered when we met, Mr. Speaker, to begin. Of course, you are aware that there was an election in 2022, and that's why we have members of the Senate here. And there were pronouncements made by the IBC, and there is a population that felt hard done by our constitutional organs, that is the the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, Mr. Speaker, and the Supreme Court gave its verdict of the same as it's provided for in the Constitution. Yet, there was nothing that you could do, Mr. Speaker, to convince some of our colleagues here and other Kenyans that ascribe to their political views that the elections were free and fair. And like I said, Mr. Speaker, earlier on, religion and politics are very difficult subjects, and sometimes to convince people isn't the easiest of conversations. There are those who hold a particular view, and there's nothing you're likely to do to change that particular view. And therefore, as a country, Mr. Speaker, it is important that we keep channels of communication open so that at the very least, Mr. Speaker, you get to understand and be persuaded by each other. In my own humble opinion, Mr. Speaker, I haven't lived on this earth long like many of my colleagues who are here. Perhaps I'm among the youngest. But at least I know one thing, that the very reason why Kenya continues to be a republic is the fact that over the years, that when we've had moments of difficulties, when we have had challenges, we have always found ways within a month and sometimes or even 2 at most of closing ranks and reasoning together and finding a way of amicably living together, Mr. Speaker. That we have always found internally good reason to still remain united as a country as opposed to disintegrating as has happened to many of our neighboring countries, Mr. Speaker. The reason why this country perhaps has never gone to war internally, Mr. Speaker, is because of such initiatives. And therefore, I'd wish to make mention to colleagues that never make light of initiatives such as this. The opportunity to interact and disagree and share with each other whatever thoughts and perspectives you may be having on all these issues is extremely important. I will listen in to the debate, Mr. Speaker, and the things that people will say, but I'd wish to guide from the very onset, Mr. Speaker, that even as we debate this report, as you make your contribution, be mindful. This is an opportunity to rise above petty politics, which we can do, and we have sufficient podiums to do out there in our constituencies and the places where we politic and say those kind of things, but be guided by the very spirit that guided this conversation, Mr. Speaker. If we had gone there and turned it into a conversation of ego measuring contest, Mr. Speaker, we wouldn't be having this report. And therefore, I plead with my colleague that as we consider, you may not entirely agree with everything or even some of the things that we've said, but at least respect the integrity of the process and the work that has gone in. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, on the 5 issues that we met, first was the issue of electoral justice and related matters, where there was felt that there is need to restructure and reconstitute the IEBC, Mr. Speaker. Second and most important, still under that topic, was the issue of boundaries delimitation, Mr. Speaker. You are aware, Mr. Speaker, that we are now past the statutory period. Actually, in the next few weeks, Parliament has to make a decision because we will be out of the constitutional time limit within which we are supposed to redo our boundaries or have at least, as Parliament, guide the country on what to do. And you know how controversial boundaries are. For 3 terms, this House, Mr. Speaker, has tried to do actually just county boundaries bill, but we have never succeeded because of many other reasons. And that item actually sits prominently on our order paper. There's a recommendation on this report on how we propose this exercise to be done. Of course, the last item under that subtopic, Mr. Speaker, was the audit of the 2022 presidential election, Mr. Speaker, where there are all these conversations about the server and whatnot, Mr. Speaker. It was interesting hearing the stories about the server and how to open and not to open it, Mr. Speaker. The second topic under consideration was outstanding constitutional matters, Mr. Speaker, where under Article 43, there was a strong feeling that there is need to establish, Mr. Speaker, ways in which we can all have a prosperous country where no countryman feel left behind in sharing of the national prosperity, Mr. Speaker, that everybody feels that they have been provided sufficient opportunity for them to thrive and live out to their full abilities, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, cost of living and such related issues featured prominently under that subtopic, Mr. Speaker. Implementation of the 2/3 gender rule featured under the discussion, and this is one of the areas where I'm disappointed in the report, and therefore we will have to make a bipartisan decision. We thought we had cracked it, Mr. Speaker, but in the last minute there were certain changes in views and perspective about the topic, and I believe this House is not lacking in men and women who believe in this gender inclusivity conversation, and therefore, at the time of the consideration of this report, you may want to guide us how to go about that particular, because I know, and I have seen many of our colleagues in the time that I have been in this House, Mr. Speaker, try to resolve this particular issue with very minimal success. If we miss, and I want my colleagues to, I beg your attention, if we miss to resolve the 2/3 gender challenge under this bipartisan spirit, then I doubt if we will ever have any other better opportunity in our term of Parliament, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, colleagues, as you debate, as you think about this particular report, you may want to guide us, and I'm willing to be convinced on what additional propositions can be brought to the table so that we resolve it, because the formulas and the ideas had already been proposed to it. Some of them very practical, that include only the addition of another maybe between 28 and 36 women and making the House fully compliant, using the model of the Senate. Because, you know, the Senate is actually short of compliance to the 2/3 gender rule by only 2 women. And that's the same formula that you wanted applied to the Assembly and making us, as an institution, the institution of Parliament, compliant. Therefore, members, you may want to guide us, because unfortunately we didn't crack it and passed it over to another subcommittee, something that you and all of us here know that is just another way of kicking the can down the road. That will never give us a solution. The decision lies in the 4 walls of the House of Parliament, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, I hope in a bipartisan manner between all of us, we can converse and agree on which way. Mr. Speaker, there were also governance issues which include the promotion of national unity and inclusivity in public appointments, Mr. Speaker. There is a proposal. These are some of the things that we've said. We did not want to do any constitutional amendment on it. We didn't want to do even any amendment of statute because the laws that are prevailing in the country are sufficient to guarantee that. And therefore, we just made policy changes that we feel the institutions that are charged with the responsibility of monitoring to ensure that there is cohesiveness in the country, inclusivity in public appointments, and so on and so forth, are able to do and live up to their mandate, Mr. Speaker. That's covered broadly in the report. Of course, there is adequate checks and balances where there is proposal of how to go about, how to counterbalance, even say the institution of parliament. A senator earns as much as a member of the National Assembly, despite the fact that geographically, even alone, more than anything, you represent a higher population than members of the National Assembly. There are more responsibilities and mandates that we have that are exclusive to the Senate, which our colleagues in the National Assembly, each and every Kenyan, if you speak to any Kenyan today, and especially in their bipartisan mood where they rise over and above our political divisions, they will tell you that one of the things that they celebrate that Kenya has made serious strides and progress in over the last couple of decades, then it is on the topic of devolution. And the institution and the House that chaperones, guides, ensures that we have successful implementation and rollout of devolution in our country is the Senate, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, how do you provide balance to such a House? There are good proposals that have been made, and it's part of what has gone to the statutory instruments. There are ways in which you can compensate the Senate, as opposed to in other countries, Mr. Speaker, the term, for example, of the Senate is longer than that of the lower houses. And there's a proposal to do that in the Republic. Make the Senate serve a longer term, Mr. Speaker, than the provided 5 years, as a way of compensating for it, Mr. Speaker. No. Relax. That's only on the second.
Order, honorable members.
That's only on the second topic. On the third item that you are considering, Mr. Speaker, is on fidelity to political parties, coalitions, and the law of multi-party democracy. Mr. Speaker, you'll remember that at the, but you do know from history of Parliament, Mr. Speaker, that in the penultimate days of this House, last time, Mr. Speaker, an amendment to the Political Parties Act was brought to this House, and it was hurriedly rushed through Parliament in the same way that we normally do some of these laws. And you are told, no, don't touch, don't amend anything. I remember that afternoon quite well, Mr. Speaker. And you are told that there is distinction, there is an animal called a coalition political party, and I don't know what, and this and the other. Mr. Speaker, hardly 6 months after that, there were serious disagreements, Mr. Speaker, over issues of funds, how to share the political party fund, how to define leadership positions, and so on and so forth. The unfortunate thing, Mr. Speaker, and I have been in this House, though not for too long, but I have seen 3 elections now in this House, is that we, as parliamentarians and practicing politicians, sometimes make certain decisions that disadvantage ourselves later on. One of the things that we always do that just a few months to every election, I saw this in 2016 before, or actually 2017, January. I saw it in 2022 as well. We make amendments to the Political Parties Act, Mr. Speaker, to suit temporary political interest. Then immediately after, when things change, we come back to the House and cry. There is no better time to have a sober conversation about how to run our political parties than right now, Mr. Speaker. And it is my hope that in the statutory instruments that we have provided, colleague senators will take time to even enrich proposals of how to better manage our political parties, Mr. Speaker, because we are the consumers, Mr. Speaker, of these policy decisions that we make in our political parties, Mr. Speaker. The fourth item, Mr. Speaker, was the entrenchment of various funds into the Constitution. And that is the NGCDF, the National Government Affirmative Action Fund, which is NGAF, and the Senate Oversight Fund, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there were conversations, of course, later on with proposals and petitions being made to us about the Ward Fund, but it was the eventual thinking of the committee that we better handle it at statute as opposed to elevating it to a constitutional fund, like the other three, Mr. Speaker, and the justifications and the reasons for that is provided further down in the report, Mr. Speaker. But these three funds form part of the constitutional amendments that have been proposed, Mr. Speaker, in this particular report. Lastly, Mr. Speaker, on the agenda items that we are considering is the establishment and entrenchment of the various state offices, and that included the office of the Leader of Opposition and the office of the Prime Cabinet Secretary, Mr. Speaker. And we considered all that, and you understand the politics revolving around all those, and we felt this is a particular time of importance, Mr. Speaker, to carry on the bipartisan spirit of this conversation to take advantage and ensure that we restructure or we entrench those offices, Mr. Speaker. We have not been able, Mr. Speaker, to date to give, and you know many times when we discuss about the office of the opposition leader, the mistake that many people make is that they discuss it with certain politicians in mind. It's not about them. We are making this constitution and the statutes that we make for posterity. There's just a question that hasn't been resolved on what happens to the candidate that garners the second highest number of votes in a presidential election, Mr. Speaker. Perhaps part of the reason why we have all these agitations and challenges after elections, Mr. Speaker, is because there are no clearly provided channels where that particular individual can exercise the opposition role in a decent way and ensuring that they hold government to account and their proposals to that effect. So, Mr. Speaker, some of the final salient, and I think because I want to be fair to colleagues, I know this is a matter that colleagues have a lot of interest and therefore want to really be brief. Allow me, Mr. Speaker, to just lastly raise out on what are the proposals and the measures that have been provided for each of those under the recommendations page. On the issue of the restructure of the IBC, the committee has recommended as an expanded selection, a reconstitution. You are aware that there is a selection panel, Mr. Speaker, that is presently trying to reconstitute IBC, and they are in the final stages. And the courts of law, Mr. Speaker, have told them that the national dialogue is a process alien to law, and therefore they are being pushed to conclude. While that is happening, Mr. Speaker, we feel, Mr. Speaker, that the best way to address this particular issue is, one, to reconstitute the selection panel. And you remember there were ideas about how to do it. I remember when we passed the IBC amendment law here, I think Senator Oburu had filed a certain amendment on the distribution of the 9 members of the selection panel. I think Catherine Muma also had an amendment. And therefore, we have listened to each and every player, tried to include other stakeholders. You know, there is a fallacious thinking, Mr. Speaker, in this country that elections are just about politicians. No. In fact, it is more about other Kenyans more than us politicians. We form a very small minority. Yet sometimes when you're doing inclusion of IBC selection panel and who gets to sit in IBC, we think only about the political class, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, there is better proposal on how to form the selection panel, growing the number. Presently, there are 7 members of a selection panel, Mr. Speaker. 4 from Parliament, that is 2, 4 actually from Parliament, and 2 from, I think, interreligious bodies, and 1 from LSK. That makes it 7. We felt that there was a better way of handling. Of course, Mr. Speaker, you are aware that one of our colleagues, Senator Mtata, has taken himself to court because he's a parliamentarian, and every time he goes to court, it means he has sued himself, and successfully so, because the courts have agreed with him that Parliament, not this particular one, but the previous Parliament, remember when we did the IBC amendment law, we arrogated ourselves 4 positions out of 7 in the selection panel, where the courts felt that that was too much from one institution. And therefore, we have reduced actually in this particular one from that 4 to 2 and distributed it to other interested parties, including professional bodies like LSK and auditors, Mr. Speaker. There was a big fight why LSK was needed in it, but eventually it was agreed that they will have 1 nominee. Of course, on audit of the 2022 presidential election, the committee recommended, Mr. Speaker, that this House, and there'll be a process through which the majority and the minority side will agree on the appointment of a team of experts who will evaluate the 2022 electoral process. Mark the difference in what? There's a difference between an election, which is an event, and the process that led us to that particular election, Mr. Speaker, and evaluate mechanisms that can be used for future elections, Mr. Speaker. On boundaries delimitation, the committee has recommended that the intervals within which review of boundaries may be done with the resolution of Parliament, investigation of claims of marginalization by the relevant body, and made provisions for fast-tracking of a legal framework for review of county boundaries as provided under Article 188. And you know there's a bill already before the floor of the Senate on this particular issue, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, the two resolutions on that particular matter, Mr. Speaker, is one, a speedy reconstitution of IBC, and secondly, setting up of that body as enshrined in Article 188. On the outstanding constitutional matter, the committee made several recommendations which centered on providing relief to Kenyans with regard to the cost of living, how to rationalize government expenditure, and it's important for colleagues to know so that later on, when the clerk of the Senate applies some of the reprieve to taxpayers provisions that are in this report, you don't hang members of our staff. There are interesting proposals, for example, on what level of government officials, anybody who travels on taxpayers' money. You know many times that even for a 1-hour flight, sometimes members insist that they must travel on business. It is a proposal of this committee as part of a cost-saving measure that any flight below 4 hours, just travel in economy, so as to save Kenyans the thousands. You know how much you are spending. And this is not to Parliament alone, to the entire, anybody who travels on taxpayers' money. That is a whole conversation about it, and so on and so forth. So many other measures, including certain levies that are in the petroleum products. There are about 2 or 3 levies that we have recommended removal of. Unfortunately, on that one, we have no say because it's purely a tax matter which will be handled by the lower house, Mr. Speaker. And developing of national policies to enhance agricultural productivity, local manufacturing, to reduce overdependence on imports, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, for the very first time, we were being informed today, for those that made it to the BPS meeting, that food items is competing now with fuel. How can we live like a supermarket, surely? Yet we don't have the money to live like those Arabs who have oil. How can we be importing more food than fuel? You know, Mr. Speaker, therefore, it speaks to dwindling fortunes of the farmer and irrelevant agricultural practices over the years, Mr. Speaker. There are proposals on how to reverse that, to make us, first of all, food secure as a country. The most important thing, Mr. Speaker, is if you cannot feed yourself, then you cannot even speak before men and women, Mr. Speaker. And that is the unfortunate situation that we find ourselves as a country, Mr. Speaker, as we turn 60 plus. And therefore, there are proposals on how to ensure that you place the needs of farmers must be respected. Mr. Speaker, I one time traveled to, I can't remember the exact state in the US, but while we were queuing on the airports, Mr. Speaker, there was a very interesting signage. He said, if you are a farmer or a military person, please jump the queue. The military men secure the country for us, the farmers feed us. They should not queue, let them hurry. That kind of thinking, Mr. Speaker, needs to guide us as a country, and remember that because we neglected our farmers over the years, that is why we have found ourselves in this situation where many people have quit farming or agriculture generally, Mr. Speaker, as a means of livelihood, Mr. Speaker, because it's not profitable. The money is with the cartels, and therefore there are proposals, Mr. Speaker, including other bills that were under consideration on the floor of the Parliament, bills to do with coffee, sugarcane, tea, cotton, pyrethrum, so on and so forth that are before. On the implementations of 2/3, I don't need to repeat and take time, Mr. Speaker. I've explained the challenge that we ran into, but I look forward to having a bipartisan conversation because, like I said, and I want to repeat this, Mr. Speaker, if we miss this opportunity to address the 2/3 gender question during the NADCO report consideration phase, the House of Parliament will not be able to raise any other quorum at any given time, Mr. Speaker, to address that question. So we must find ways of introducing whatever amendments are necessary, Mr. Speaker, so that we resolve this particular issue. And I have said, having looked at all the formulas that have been brought before this House, that came before NADCO, the Senate route, Mr. Speaker, still continues to be one of the most practical about it. If you apply it, Mr. Speaker, say in the Assembly right now, and with a small modification, Mr. Speaker, that includes addition of the women, county women MP position already as an affirmative position, then it means you will add below actually 35 women MPs into that House, Mr. Speaker, and it will be compliant, because you already have the 47 not forming part of the overall equation, and the wording for that was already available to us, only that people held a different view to it. We will listen to your conversations about it. On governance and issues, including promoting national unity and inclusivity, we have said, Mr. Speaker, that legislative interventions to guide the process. Many people came to us, Mr. Speaker, that they are feeling marginalized in their counties. And from all counties, by the way, it's not just the counties that have interesting ethnic dynamics, say like Migori and Trans Nzoia, because of the Kurias and the Sabauts and the all. Even in counties like Homa Bay, it will interest you to know, Beatrice, that there is a clan that came and said that our clan has never come close to leadership. I'm forgetting the exact name of that particular clan, and they said, over Kanyapir. Yes, that, I've been reminded that particular name. And they wanted their own distinctive way of being addressed. These are issues that we can address legislatively, which is the same assurance that we gave to our colleagues who came from this other place, that Senate, and this is something that you colleagues senators must find ways of addressing, marginalization. The same competition for raw power that we see at the national level shouldn't permeate into our counties as we watch. Yet, unfortunately, because of how certain county governments are run and how they are configured, I know Senator Onyanka likes this, because I know there's a conversation around clan happening in Kisii County, that they are feeling as if members of a particular clan are being targeted by the particular administration in place. So as Senate, we must be aware of these sensitivities, and we must come up with sound legislative policies that will address and ensure that a governor cannot marginalize anyone in their appointments, in the distribution of projects and resources, because that is at the height of that conversation. On the adequate checks and balances, I had already addressed myself to it. Fidelity to political parties, I have mentioned. Of course, entrenching of funds, there is constitutional amendment on the 3 funds. I said on the Ward Development Fund that it was our feeling that we can enshrine it in statute, so that we leave it to the various county assemblies to determine. We just make it, we establish the fund, but leave it to the various county assemblies and the agreement, because COG will come and make a presentation during the normal legislative making process on how they wish to be rolled out. Either we can determine it for them here nationally, or leave it to be determined by the various county assemblies on what amounts, depending. I think I have seen various counties and governors prefer to deal with it differently, and we will be more than willing to be listened to. So because of that sensitivity, we felt that it is better addressed in statute. But the 3 other funds, that is the Senate Oversight, NGAF, and CDF, proposed to be a constitutional fund, and it is part of the statutory, items that we have attached, part of the constitutional amendment bill, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, that is the long and short of what is entailed in the report. Of course, as I say, the devil is in the details, Mr. Speaker, but I'd wish that colleagues debate soberly, guide us on how to make amendments. Remember, this is a report we are debating, but then there will be now the statutes that we follow. A constitutional amendment bill for the various provisions that we want to do, no amendments to the Constitution, and other statutory proposals in the form of bills that are attached to the report. During that time, the guidance and the thinking of the committee is that should there be a wish to amend anything, then it must be in the concurrence of both sides. Failure to the concurrence of both sides of the floor, then the issue remains as is, Mr. Speaker, because this is a bipartisan and a negotiated document, and those statutes are all listed, and they are part and parcel of this particular report. Mr. Speaker, I don't want to be longer than that because I know colleagues are queuing and waiting to respond. With those many remarks, if there are items that I've forgotten, I am sure that the lion from Nyamira, my very good neighbor, the Senator Okongo Mogeni, Commissioner, Mr. Speaker, will perhaps do even better justice than I have done to this report. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, at that point, I want to humbly request that he seconds the motion, Mr. Speaker, to adopt this report. I thank you.
Senator Mogeni.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I feel privileged, Mr. Speaker, to stand here and second this momentous report that was arrived at from the discussions of the National Dialogue Committee. Mr. Speaker, I want to begin by thanking my colleagues, senators, who graciously approved my nomination to sit in the National Dialogue Committee, and also thank the team that was chosen by the majority side during the discussions. Mr. Speaker, we would not have achieved what we achieved if we did not have a spirit of give and take. And I must say, Mr. Speaker, that it was not easy at the beginning, Mr. Speaker. When we arrived at the borders of Kenya, Mr. Speaker, we began first by having a very hostile environment. The other side had their own room for tea, we had our own, and we sized each other for 2-3 days. But finally, Mr. Speaker, we decided to put Kenya first and our own personal interests at the back. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, the report that has been moved by the majority leader is a work of many hands, many brains, many mouths, Mr. Speaker. This process had wide public engagement. More than 700 Kenyans sent a memorandum to the committee, Mr. Speaker. We had even senators, including my good friend, Professor Ojenda, appear before our committee. Senator Wambua appeared before our committee. More than 60 Kenyans and interest groups appeared before our committee. We expected to see Senator Cheragei, but he never made it to Bomas, Mr. Speaker. So this input, Mr. Speaker, has gone through intense public participation. So this is not a product of just the political class. It's a product that has come from the views that we have received from many Kenyans. Mr. Speaker, as you have seen, next to the report is a proposal to amend a few articles of our Constitution, Mr. Speaker, and there has been arguments, which I want to disapprove this afternoon, from a number of Kenyans, that our Constitution was promulgated 14 years ago. Therefore, it is too soon to attempt to amend any article of our Constitution. Mr. Speaker, even very advanced democracies, including the United States of America, that has had their Constitution for more than 200 years, Mr. Speaker, did the first amendment after 5 years of the passage of the American Constitution. And it was a raft of amendments. The first 12 amendments of the American Constitution were done in a record 5 years, Mr. Speaker. Since then, Mr. Speaker, that Constitution, most Kenyans will see them on TV saying that, you know, the American Constitution has never been amended. No, the American Constitution has been amended a record 27 times. In fact, Mr. Speaker, there have been 33 initiatives to amend the Constitution, but 27 have gone through. So in any country, Mr. Speaker, when you have a Constitution, a time comes, Mr. Speaker, when you have to review and fix what's not working. Even if you go to advanced democracies like Australia, they have done 8 amendments to their constitution. But what we need to learn as senators, Mr. Speaker, is that in those 8 amendments, 7 of them were through a bipartisan approach, like what we are doing here. A bipartisan approach is the best way to amend a constitution. So, Mr. Speaker, let's Kenyans not start bashing us, the political class, that we are on a mission to, water down the 2010 Constitution. This attempt is actually to strengthen, fix what is not working in the 2010 Constitution. Mr. Speaker, we have borrowed from many jurisdictions in accepting some of the proposals that have been carried into this Constitution. Senator Cheruiyot has made reference to the tenure of this House, Mr. Speaker, and we have looked at many bicameral jurisdictions, including the United States of America, on the term of House of Representatives and the Senate. Mr. Speaker, in the U.S., House of Representatives are elected every 2 years. Senators get elected after every 6 years. You go to Australia, House of Representatives get elected every 4 years. Senators after 6 years. The same thing with the Philippines. And these proposals, Mr. Speaker, were brought to the committee by Kenyans who took cognizance of the fact that the Senate exists to protect devolution. And therefore, the proposal that is in this Constitution, Mr. Speaker, proposing an enhanced term of the Senate, we have borrowed from best international practices. We have looked at the best constitutions in the world from jurisdictions that practice democracy and that have had senators having a longer time for a number of years, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on the cost of living, Mr. Speaker, which is a matter that closely touches on the interest of Kenyans, the people we represent, Mr. Speaker, we have to have a give and take approach, Mr. Speaker. Initially, Mr. Speaker, the stand of the position that was taken by the minority side at the NADCO discussions was to propose total overhaul of the tax regime, do away with the VAT on fuel, from 16% down to 8%, do away, scrap totally the housing levy. But we arrived at a compromise at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker. And we have agreed, Mr. Speaker, if you read the report, because we acknowledge that Kenyans are facing a massive burden on taxation, Mr. Speaker, there is a proposal, Mr. Speaker, that the Treasury should have a comprehensive review on the tax policies so that we reduce the tax burden on Kenyans. There is a minimum proposal, Mr. Speaker, that we reduce the road maintenance levy by 5 shillings so that we can make fuel more affordable to Kenyans. We reduce the adulteration tax on fuel by 3 shillings. But what is contained in the report, Mr. Speaker, is a recommendation, an undertaking by the government, the Kenya Kwanza government, that from February this year, there will be a comprehensive review of the tax regime so that the tax burden on Kenyans can be reduced. The other matter, Mr. Speaker, that is very critical to the people we represent, the Wanjikus, Mr. Speaker, is the cash transfer for old persons, Mr. Speaker. As you know, colleagues, currently older persons or people with disabilities get a paltry 2,000 shillings from the government for support, Mr. Speaker. But this committee has recommended, Mr. Speaker, that the cash transfer for older persons be enhanced upwards. Initially, we had arrived at a figure of 5,000, but we agreed that we send this to the Treasury so that it can be reviewed upwards. You know, if there are people who have been hit by the cost of living, it is the older people at our constituencies like Nandi, where Senator Cherage comes from, people with disabilities. So this report has made a recommendation that this amount that is paid to the older people be reviewed upwards, maybe to a sum of 5,000 Kenya shillings, on the issues of functions, which has been a big problem. You know, senators, those of us who are here last term, you know the problem we have had on transfer of functions to counties. This report makes a recommendation that there should be a comprehensive review of all functions, all devolved functions that have not been transferred to counties, and that those functions, once transferred, they should be followed with the resources. So that's an attempt really to strengthen devolution. In terms of enforcement of all the Article 43 rights, you know, the right to shelter, the right to food, there is a recommendation that we form a national economic and social council that will address comprehensively all the rights that are captured in Article 43 of the Constitution. Point of order?
Yes, Miraj, what is your point of order?
Is our speaker safe? We need to know.
Now you can see the speaker is well guarded. Proceed.
We are concerned.
The speaker is well guarded. Proceed, Senator Mogeni, proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on how to enhance farming, Mr. Speaker, we have made a proposal that the government should set aside money to ensure that we incorporate water harvesting technologies in our counties, Mr. Speaker, so that we can have rainwater stored that can be used for agriculture, as happens in many countries. On a matter that has been of great concern to all of us, Mr. Speaker, the issue of impeachment of governors, Mr. Speaker, we have made recommendation that Section 33 of the County Government Act should go through a comprehensive review so that we have a comprehensive law that deals with the issues of impeachment of governors. I hope, senators, we can learn from the experiences we have seen as a Senate on the many impeachments that this House has dealt with before. A matter that is also very of significance to this House, Mr. Speaker, is a proposal to raise the money that is allocated to counties. Mr. Speaker, as you know, the current Constitution gives a minimum of 15%, but this committee has recommended that that minimum threshold should be raised upwards to a minimum of 20%. Mr. Speaker, on the issue of dispute resolution, as Professor Ojenda will tell you, Mr. Speaker, we have had, Mr. Speaker, can you protect me from wide
order, honorable senators. Senator Gloria. Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on this issue of IEBC, Mr. Speaker, you know that the interview panel for IEBC has been in place for the last 6 months, yet they have never completed the work that they were meant to do. Advertise for shortlisting, advertise for applicants for the position of IEBC commissioners, shortlist, interview, and send names to the president. Mr. Speaker, this committee has recommended, Mr. Speaker, that the time for inviting applicants, doing the shortlisting, interviewing, and forwarding names to the president should be reduced to a maximum of 90 days. So that, Mr. Speaker, panelists don't take forever to just select 7 commissioners to serve in our IEBC. And Mr. Speaker, this particular recommendation is urgent. There are a number of constituencies in the country that have remained unrepresented. In my own county, I have 2 wards, the ward of Nyamaya and the ward of Nyansiongo, that have not had MCAs for the last 7 years. So this recommendation, Mr. Speaker, is trying to make the playing field level to ensure that the referee is chosen by a team that is impartial and that is not partisan. Mr. Speaker, on on the resolution of election disputes, Mr. Speaker, we have recommended amendments to Article 88(4) of the Constitution so that the IEBC is totally removed from the issue of resolving any disputes emanating from nomination. And this power, Mr. Speaker, we are proposing that it be transferred to a new body that we are recommending to replace the dispute mechanisms that is in place, so that IEBC will be removed totally from the issue of dealing with any disputes touching on candidates who are seeking elective posts. In the Supreme Court, we are recommending that the duration for hearing and determining election disputes be extended from 14 days to 21 days. On party discipline, Mr. Speaker, we are proposing, Mr. Speaker, that we should have fidelity to political parties, Mr. Speaker. There is a proposal, Mr. Speaker, to enhance the discipline mechanisms for our political parties, Mr. Speaker, so that people can have, discipline and allegiance to their political parties once they are elected. And those who are not comfortable with their political parties, Mr. Speaker, they can have the right to seek re-election. The Speaker, as a way of also dealing with the cost of running government, Mr. Speaker, we have proposed that a number of bodies should be merged, especially the bodies around human rights. We have the Kenya National Human Rights Commission, we have the National Gender and Equality Commission, and NCIC. We have proposed, Mr. Speaker, that these three bodies should be merged, Mr. Speaker, so that we save costs on running government. So in total, Mr. Speaker, the proposals that are contained in this report, Mr. Speaker, are very useful to this country, Mr. Speaker. I echo the words of my colleague, Senator Cheruyot, that we should have a bipartisan approach, Mr. Speaker. We should not fear initiative to amend the Constitution. If there is anything that requires us to go to a referendum, let's go to a referendum. If these amendments can be dealt with by us as parliamentarians on the floor of the House, let's come together and deal with the amendments, Mr. Speaker, without creating unnecessary heat in the country. So I urge all our colleagues, Mr. Speaker, to embrace the spirit that we have shown as a committee, so that we all move together as a country. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I second. Thank you.
Yes, Senator Boni, what is your point of order? You're shooting too fast, Senator Boni. So I will now proceed to propose the question, which is that the Senate adopts the report of the National Dialogue Committee laid on the table of this Senate on Wednesday, 14 February 2024. Now, Senator Boni, you may proceed with your point of order.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise pursuant to Standing Order number 3 to move that the debate on this motion, National Dialogue Committee report, be limited to not more than 10 minutes per senator contributing to this debate. This will allow an opportunity for all senators who wish to contribute to speak. I beg to move, and I request Senator Edwin Sifuna to second this motion.
Senator Boni, before Senator Sifuna seconds, which standing order were you quoting? Did I hear correctly? Standing order
111.
Very well. Proceed, Senator Sifuna.
Mr. Speaker, I second.
Now, honorable senators, this is a procedural motion. I need not propose the question and therefore open. We may, as we've always been doing, strike a consensus and move without necessarily spending a lot of time debating this particular motion. The proposal here is to be limited to, is it 10 minutes? That's the motion, for 10 minutes. But through consensus, we can agree. Do we go for the 10? Do I need to put this to the vote, really? So a maximum of 10 minutes. You may speak for 1 or 2 minutes, but a maximum of 10 minutes. Thank you. Senator Manzo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me an opportunity to contribute on this very important report. Mr. Speaker, what brought up the convening of the bipartisan talks, Mr. Speaker, was a situation in the country which was beginning to become a little bit tense. And it is very important, Mr. Speaker, especially the matter of boundaries review. Mr. Speaker, right now, between Makueni and Taita Taveta, there is an issue. It is even pending before the courts. And there are quite a number of other issues where, boundaries could be reviewed. And this particular team has a mandate from the Constitution to deal with all matters related to that. I'm even aware there is a matter pending before this House between Makueni and Taita Taveta. But if the boundaries review was to do its job, then that will sort out a lot of issues between Makueni and Taita Taveta. Between myself and the Senator for Taita Taveta would like to coexist very well. But a place called Mutituandei, it is not clear which county should be collecting levies. And the matter having gone to court with my good friend Omutata, and having gotten some court order, and then Makueni was dissatisfied with that court order, has proceeded to the Court of Appeal. And recently somebody posted in the social media in Makueni that now there is a final order, which is not true. The Court of Appeal has not determined all the issues, and we'd like to tell the people of Makueni that we'll be sorting that matter at the Court of Appeal, or between ourselves as counties as soon as possible, so that we may proceed. But the matter of boundaries review is very important, because this would automatically save the court time and save the counties a lot of headache, which is unnecessary. Mr. Speaker, cost of living is key. Many Kenyans in this country, Mr. Speaker, are finding it very difficult to send their children to school, to feed themselves, and we are very lucky there were reasonable rains across the country. Kajiado, which is my neighbor, had already moved their cattle to Makueni County, and we had accommodated them very well. But the resources were beginning to dwindle, and thank God there were rains. Those rains have really helped the country very much, because people worked very hard, and reasonably across the country we've got a bumper harvest. But the question is, what if now these rains didn't come? We have not done enough irrigation to safeguard the country or make it food secure. And the projects like Thwake Dam, which should be giving Kenyans a hope, at least for 4 counties, the ones in Lower Eastern and Kajiado, to have irrigation. And even the Grand High Force Dam, which we have not yet invested in. So while looking at food security and the cost of living, when parents are unable to take their children to school, when the middle class feels overtaxed, and it is actually the middle class which takes care of the hustlers, the workers. It is the middle class who will give a little bit of labor or work to the lower class, and they will also earn a living. The moment the middle class cannot operate, cannot earn, and the moment life is very difficult for them, then it means very, very many Kenyans have no opportunity to take their children to school or to enjoy their daily living at a reasonable cost. I've had quite a number of proposals made to lower the cost of living. Omutata and myself, we had proceeded to the Constitutional Court, and we did not come out there empty-handed. Quite a number of issues, including the amendment of the Statutory Instruments Act, which this Senate had annulled some instruments. And the government or the National Assembly went on to process this finance bill, including that particular amendment, with the High Court and the Court of Appeal. I've now said the government, the ministers, whose instruments have expired and have been annulled by the Senate, should now come back to this Senate now that the mischievous amendment did not go through. The authority of the Senate has to be respected. The authority of the courts has to be respected. And it is important that we all follow the rule of law. Partisans are very, very important. We have the issue of the old people. The feedback which has been coming from the money sent to them is that some of these monies never get to these people. The system is not clear enough. The so-called 2,000 shillings at times they end up with 1,000. So I like the proposal that they be reasonably taken care of so that people can enjoy their old age in this country. We've got quite a number of senior citizens who are no longer working. Some have no children to support them. They have no land to farm, and they may not have the energy to farm. So that particular issue came up with the bipartisan, and it is very, very important we take care of all the old people. And we have a system which works, probably even a law or a policy, so that, in fact, most of them are proposing if their telephone numbers could be used and the money is wired there, it saves a lot of expenses for the country. Now that saving the cost of government is expensive. Mr. Speaker, on that particular one, sometimes you get surprised. A single minister who is not threatened by anybody at all goes with the 3 cars, you know, and has 10 people, you know, and no one is threatening your life. I'm sure if it was Cheriot who was a minister, would travel with 1 car, greeting people on the way and serving the nation. But there's no need for a minister to travel with 3 cars. And sometimes...
Senator Manzo, there's a point of information. Okay. Would you wish to be informed?
No, I don't wish to be informed. I'm quite aware.
Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So we must look in totality, you know, the cost of...
What is the point of order, Senator Chiranke?
Mr. Speaker, sir, is it in order understanding 105 of our Senate standing orders for Senator Manzo to mislead the country? Yet at the moment, all was there under the vulnerable group are being paid through an M-Pesa. So is it in order for him to not alter the statement and mislead the entire House and the Republic? Or he should be informed of the same?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I said the information I have, and this is a feedback. This M-Pesa is not yet to everybody. There are some chiefs or other people through that system who are still, even some of these old people, Mr. Speaker, have to go, you know, have to use their relatives, you know, to be able to access this money. So the point I'm making is that we really have to make the older people comfortable, and if we can come up with a better system, that would be very good, Mr. Speaker. So there are quite a number of issues, Mr. Speaker. IBC is very key, and Mr. Speaker, an IBC which is constituted with the interests of everybody at heart is important. I believe political parties are very important tools of election, and they are very important tools of politics. The political parties must have their place, they must have their share, but most number of things, Mr. Speaker, which can be improved through IBC. Finally, most of this institutional change and the constitution, all this goes back to the people so that the Kenyan people can make a determination on how they want to be ruled and how some of these issues must be handled, Mr. Speaker. Finally, if you are no longer interested in serving in that political party, then you resign. And there's a by-election, Mr. Speaker. Unfortunately, we will not be having IBC. I'm aware it is that that particular area of constituency and quite a number of MCS, you know, who are have not been repressed because there is no representation. It is hearing and process could either be concluded to the benefit of the nation. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Mundigi.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to support the NADCO report, and I start by really appreciating all the committee members led by our leaders, majority from both houses, that were able to embark on a very intensive journey on the matters that the majority leader was able to share before this House, and I really want to applaud them. Also thank all citizens for the patience. Thank our brothers and sisters from the opposition for feeling that it is more impactful to be able to put needs to have different stakeholders, like from the church leaders, leaders from different political parties with the composition. This will ensure that we will be able to give opportunities to the people of Basil constituency, whereby their member died and up to date they are not represented in parliament. So with this reconstitution of the IEBC, then we will be able to have representation of parliament. The discussion of the funds ranging from the which has surprised us as women leaders, Mr. Speaker, is on the issue of the 2/3 gender rule. That to our surprise yesterday when we had our PG with the President, Dr. William, we realized that then the 2/3 is no longer within the NADCO. And the President, William Ruto, has been very much on the forefront, ensuring that he supports the women agenda very much. And so this is a subject that we also do not want it left out within NADCO because we had representatives led by the Governor of Embu, Cecily Mbarire, and so it is issue of the 2/3 gender should be very highly considered in this particular report. The discussion of the office of the opposition, Mr. Speaker, is very important because, as we've said clearly, the opposition leader plays a very key role. And I'm happy that we are all looking forward that he's requested to proceed to a next level, which is fine because that is a representation of our country, that is a representation of Kenya, and it is a plus because then we elevate to the next international level. So creating an office for the opposition leader is a plus. Also the creation of the office of the Prime Cabinet's office is still a plus because anybody can be in this position. So it should not be looked unto as if it's for a specific personnel. These are offices that are open to anybody in this country, and anybody qualifies to be the same way we all qualify to be in this Senate. It is not super glued to any individual. Anybody can be. So when we talk about these positions, we should not look at them as if they're just benefiting an individual, but for the future, because you can also maybe qualify to be in that particular space. The piece that has been in place, the county that I represent, that is Nairobi, led by my Senator of Nairobi, Senator Sifuna, you realize we had quite a number of kills previously because we had not agreed to be able to have a sit down. The results of sitting down to have this discussion, we've had a very peaceful capital sit. It has given the NADCO and the bipartisan talks have given business people an opportunity to be able to execute their businesses. Institutions will be able to carry their mandate as required, Mr. Speaker. And so I want to really applaud both sides' position, emphasize so that Senator Kavindu stops distracting you, so that you understand that the 2/3 is very key for us as women. It has been left out. We are not happy about it, but we are very optimistic because we know that the leadership will consider in ensuring that